Bom dia, daqui a 25 minutos eu vou entrevistar o professor Nikolai Petrovsky, responsável pela VAXINE, criadora da COVAX com a 19, a vacina australiana. O professor é cientista, é investigador, é professor de medicina na Flinders University. Ele é também vice-presidente e secretário-geral da International Immunomics Society. O seu campo de pesquisa vai desde a biossegurança, de testes clínicos, dos coronavírus, MERS, SARS e Covid, imunologia, e é uma pessoa importante na tentativa de descobrir a origem do vírus, porque acredita ser essencial essa descoberta para conseguirmos combater com eficácia e eficiência o vírus SARS-CoV-2 e a doença causada por ele, a Covid-19. Este professor faz estudos e os estudos que ele faz e as pesquisas e os resultados onde tem chegado levam-me a crer que, apesar do vírus não ter sofrido engenharia molecular, ou seja, não ter tido as suas células moleculares modificadas pela mão humana, o vírus poderá ter sido criado pela mão humana no sentido de se terem misturado 2, 3 ou mais tipos de coronavírus e depois obtido um resultado a partir dessa recombinação, ou seja, um evento de recombinação em que dois vírus se encontram, e essa recombinação é natural, não tem a mão do homem, mas a junção dos dois vírus, o encontro deles terá sido feito não de forma tão, digamos, por acidente, mas sim por uma experiência laboratorial. E, portanto, também quero tentar ir a fundo nesta questão para ver o que é que o professor Dr. Nikolai Petrovsky tem a dizer sobre esta teoria, sobre os estudos que tem feito e, acima de tudo, sobre a questão das vacinas, se são terapêuticas ou se são vacinas como as que, aliás, sabemos que não são vacinas como as que nós conhecemos, mas se a forma, o modelo RNA pode funcionar algum dia como vacina mesmo, ou se continua apenas a ser uma terapêutica e se isso invalida ou dificulta a questão da imunidade em grupo. Pronto, também vou tentar perguntar-lhe sobre os tratamentos e as terapêuticas não vacinais, ou seja, que não têm a ver com a vacina, e vejamos como é que isto vai correr. Vai ser via Zoom, mas vai ser agora às 8h30, e assim que eu conseguir postar, desta vez com um bocadinho melhor qualidade, porque tantos imprevistos, tantos programas de computador, de telemóvel, depois o Zoom funciona no computador para gravar, mas não grava no telemóvel, enfim, onde a qualidade de imagem e de som, para mim, é muito melhor. Às vezes dificulta esta questão aqui, mas desejem-me sorte e estejam atentos porque eu vou postar aqui depois a entrevista. Obrigado, bom dia a todos.
Hi, sorry about that. It's
okay.
been a terrible day.
I hope it gets better now.
No, I don't think so. I've got enough meetings, but
hello, Professor. So, yeah. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, so you want to do a blog, is it? Or
Yes. I have a bachelor in Sciences of Communication in Information and Journalism. And because the market for journalism is so tightened up, I thought on doing a channel where I interview people that I actually believe that are relevant, journalistically speaking.
So I've got 10 minutes right now, but then we can always do another session.
It's okay, no worries. Thank you so much.
Maybe 10 minutes is enough, who knows?
Okay, who knows?
Let's try.
Let's try, please. I have a lot of questions, but I think I'll do the most important ones, I believe. The vaccines we have right now, Professor, do you believe they are going to work as vaccines, or are all of them more like a therapeutic to people?
So the vaccines we have now, I mean, they're definitely prophylactic vaccines because you give them to protect people before they get infected. You know, they don't work if you're already infected. So they're not therapeutic. I think what your question is going to is will these vaccines stop infection?
Yes.
Or will they just stop the symptoms of infection?
Yes, that's the question.
Now, what we know is at the moment they stop the symptoms of infection. and maybe they reduce the risk of infection a small amount. But that's no different to the meningococcal vaccines, which we already give to children, where we know that those vaccines don't stop children getting infected with the meningococcal in their nose, yes, but they do stop them getting sick from meningococcus. Okay. So vaccines can work just to prevent symptoms. They don't have to necessarily prevent infection, although if they do both, it's best.
Okay. So before you enter the Zoom conversation, I've been telling a little bit about who Professor Nikolai is, your work. And I believe it's an interview or a video for some social media where you said testing to find a vaccine is much easier now because instead of taking 10 years or 15 years using technology, you can take hours or days. How are you using in vaccine that technology to test and to see how it works, the vaccine you're developing, the COVAX 19?
So we're using artificial intelligence and a lot of computer modeling tools. We didn't have these, 10 or 20 years ago even. So this is very recent. And so now we can do a lot of our experiments, our design of what our vaccine needs to look like. We can do all of that in the computer. And of course, that saves an enormous amount of time. And that's why these vaccines have been able to move very fast.
Okay, that's good because we kind of are in a worry, aren't we? So, yes. So you're developing the COVAX 19. And I wonder if it will work as a prophylactic measure as well, or do you know for sure it will stop not only the symptoms, but actually getting the virus?
So we don't know yet the answer to that in humans, but we have done studies in ferrets and in monkeys where we've vaccinated them and then we've given them a very large dose of virus. And so what we found is that we stopped the symptoms in the animals, okay, but we also stopped any virus in the lungs or the nose of the animals. So it does look like we're stopping the infection. But again, it's early days. We still have to show that in human trials.
Yes. I don't know if I told Professor Nikolai where I actually found you. I was reading a book of James Ricketts, and he mentions you. And it's quite surprising, this book. I was not expecting at all that it would have so much information, not only on economics, but in general about this situation. And here says that, and I've been looking for your study, that in a more recent study, professors suggest that SARS-CoV-2 may be the result of a cell culture experiment in laboratory, and that you observed that the virus had genetic elements that resembled bad coronaviruses and other coronaviruses. The thing I want to ask is how important it is for us to find the origin of the virus, and if so, if we do it, and if we come to the conclusion that actually China did not go so transparent about the situation, what does this mean? What does this mean to the world and to find the cure to the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic?
So first of all, as a scientist, the truth is just always important, because as scientists, that's all we ever try to look for. Yes. So we don't need a justification to look for the truth. And here the truth would be, where did the virus come from? So I don't think we need to justify that. The answer is, we believe it's good to know everything. And therefore, here's something that we don't know, we should look for the answer. For sure. But I think there are reasons why that answer is important. If this virus came, as some people believe, from an animal, we need to find that animal, because otherwise other viruses are going to come from that animal and we may have another pandemic. So if we don't identify how this virus came into humans, how can we stop this happening again? And we really don't want more pandemics. And so to stop pandemics, we have to understand how they start. And to understand how this started, you have to find where is the source of the virus.
Yes. I don't know about Australia. I actually think we here in Portugal, in Europe, I believe, we are not receiving so much updates about Australia and what's happening, in the matter that, for example, I never heard about you, Professor, because I believe that the political, the correct, I don't know how to say this in English, but we have this term that nowadays we have to be very diplomatic about the situation. And unfortunately, I believe this is going against what science believes in, that is finding the truth. So I think every time a scientist steps a little bit out of the major narrative, the media excludes him or her immediately.
Yes.
So one of the reasons that I really wanted to interview you, Professor, is because of what I've been reading. I believe that you actually didn't drop out the race of finding the truth. And that's important for everyone that is watching this investigation, this search. So I want to ask you if there is already any formal investigation on why a complete clamp was not put on the initial outbreak, using your words.
Look, I think that there were a lot of errors occurred early during this outbreak in China, but subsequently, you know, WHO, you know, Europe, you know, Australia, we let people get onto cruise ships and then get off cruise ships, and they started a massive outbreak in Australia, which fortunately we controlled. But you know, we wouldn't have had any deaths in Australia at all during this pandemic if mistakes hadn't been made. So I think that the answer is that this virus, you know, spread outside China because people didn't react fast enough. Normally, when you have an outbreak, the first thing that you do is you seal off the outbreak. Doesn't matter what, how serious or how minor, you isolate it, and then you work out what's happening. Okay. Here, the opposite happened. You know, people were encouraged to leave the center of the outbreak, encouraged to get on planes and go to the rest of the world. You know, China was very angry when countries like Australia said we're terminating flights from Wuhan initially, and ultimately from all of China. Now, all of those things should have happened the first day, and no one should have cared about the politics, you know. And China should have been the first country saying, please shut down the flight. Like,
exactly, because
we don't want to infect the rest of the world.
Of course. It wasn't an urgent
matter. The Chinese politically tried to argue that no one should shut the flights. WHO told everyone, keep all your flights open.
Yes.
Now that goes against all pandemic training.
No, yeah, of course. I don't know if it is because of the information that came from WHO and China, but our director of DGS, that's the National Health Organization, told us you just don't need to worry about touching your hands in or putting your hands in your mouth, but masks gives a falsely idea of protection, so maybe you don't have to use them. You know, all of these misinformations were coming, and we were already at home, and this you didn't know what is true, what is not. So I believe that gave an opportunity for people making vaccines, for people of the pharmaceutical industry, to create their narrative, and then media perpetuated that narrative, and we stopped knowing or hearing other stuff that was different from the major narrative. Yeah, and that was.
I think the narrative is, you know, was political. Yes. Everywhere, and a lot of that narrative was, this is not a serious virus. This is no worse than the flu. Mm-hmm. And that narrative was incredibly destructive because it meant that people didn't take any major precautions.
Of course.
And that, you know, we're now at well over, you know, 2.5 million deaths, and it's still going up. And, you know, I think now we need to ask who drove that narrative. You know, we need to prosecute the people, the primary people who were driving that narrative in the world press, you know, in March and February last year, should be prosecuted.
Of course, I
for false information, and they should take responsibility. Millions of people have died because of a false narrative. So we need to ask and investigate, where did the false narrative start? Who transmitted that false narrative and you know, expanded it all over the world so that people didn't take this virus seriously?
Of course, and it is still legit to keep telling that narrative, because a lot of people believe that if they get infected with SARS-CoV-2 and they survive with no symptoms, that it's okay, they're vaccinated. And studies show, and researches, that with time, people start getting the, let's say, the symptoms that they did not get when they were infected.
Yeah, so look, I think that's right, that this is not a virus you want to get. I think that's the answer. We don't yet know the long-term consequences of being infected by this virus. Even if you don't get very sick when you first get infected, you know, might it have long-term consequences? We know there are other viruses that have long-term consequences on our health. We simply, this is a new virus. We know nothing about it still.
Exactly.
We should be very cautious, and we shouldn't be encouraging anyone to get the virus. You know, I think that's very dangerous, because we really don't know what the consequences will be.
Okay.
Now I've got a break now, so I've got an overdue for another call.
It's okay, of course.
But that gives you something to go on, and then if you want to set up another call, I'm happy to do.
Of course, Professor. Actually, I just have one small, quick question.
Yeah.
You call this, you know, the creation of the virus, you believe it can be a petri dish. You believe so, not because it had human hands on constructing the molecule of the virus, but because let's say the meeting of the 2 or 3 viruses were handmade, right?
Yeah, so you could, you know, a virus can be created in a laboratory without a human knowing the virus is being created. Viruses can get into cells that you're growing in a laboratory. They can actually interact and share genetic material with other viruses in the lab. And so a new virus could be created in the lab, and no one in that lab actually knows it's happened. So it doesn't have to be that a human said, I'm going to create a virus.
No. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Professor, for your interview. I'll be glad to have another call with you. I'm so sorry for taking so long, but I really needed to ask all these questions. Thank you very much for your presence here today. You know, if you can and if you want, people that are seeing this, you can follow me on Instagram, you can follow me on YouTube, you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. It's all the same name, CanalDoFernandoVieira, C-A-N-A-L, of, in this case, D-O, Fernando Vieira, V-I-E-I-R-A. Obrigado.